The transport shuttle descended through the artificial atmosphere of Kepler 7 station, and Arya Chen pressed her face against the viewport to catch her first glimpse of the Galactic Military Academy. The station hung in space like a massive wheel, its metal surface gleaming under the light of 3 distant stars. She had dreamed of this moment for years. Ever since Earth had been granted membership in the Galactic Coalition, now she was here, the first human ever accepted into the Academy's prestigious halls. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud, and Arya gathered her single bag. She stepped into the arrival bay and immediately felt the weight of 100 stairs. The other cadets towered over her. Krathari warriors stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled skin rippling with dense muscle, their eyes glowing with an inner fire that spoke of generations bred for warfare. Alex scouts moved with impossible grace, their elongated limbs and multiple joints allowing them movements that seemed to defy physics. Thexian tanks lumbered past in their thick armor plating, natural bone growths that could stop plasma fire. And then there was Ario 5. Feet 4 inches of what these aliens clearly considered fragile flesh. She walked through the crowd, her boots clicking softly on the metal floor. Nobody moved aside. For her, he had to navigate around bodies that barely acknowledged her existence. Few cadets glanced down at her with what might have been curiosity, but most simply looked away. The orientation hall was massive, with seats arranged in steep tiers that rose toward a vaulted ceiling. Arya found a spot near the back, settling into a chair designed for someone twice her size. Her feet barely touched the floor. The lights dimmed and Instructor Vactor strode onto the central platform. He was Krathari, his scales bearing the scars of countless battles. One eye replaced with a glowing cybernetic implant. His voice boomed through the hall without need for amplification. Cadets, you represent the finest warriors your species have to offer, he began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. You have earned your place here through strength, skill, and dedication. He continued his speech, outlining the Academy's 300-year history, its role in training the Coalition's elite forces, and the challenges that awaited them. Then he paused. This year, we have a unique addition to our ranks, Vactor said, and Arya felt her stomach tighten for the first time. We have accepted a cadet from Earth, a spotlight founder in the back. Ruria stood, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression neutral. The applause that followed was polite but sparse. She could hear whispers spreading through the hall like ripples in water. That's a human. So small Earth is classified as a death world. But look at her, must be a clerical error in the classification system. Arya sat back down as the spotlight moved away. She kept her breathing steady, her face calm. This was exactly what she had expected. Vector finished his address and dismissed them to find their assigned squads. Arya consulted her datapad and made her way to Bay 7, where Squad Razor was scheduled to meet. She found them already gathered in a tight circle. The squad leader was obvious immediately, a Krathari, who stood even taller than most of his species, his scales a deep crimson that marked him as coming from one of the warrior
bloodline.
He was gesturing broadly as he spoke to the others, his voice full of confidence. Director, Arya said quietly, reading his name from her datapad. Krathari turned, looking around before finally looking down. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. You're the human, he asked Arya Chen. She confirmed. You're assigned to Squad Razor. Director exchanged glances with the other squad members to more Krathari. A Velix and a Vexian, right, he said slowly, as if processing an unpleasant surprise. Well, welcome to the squad, I suppose. The Velix, whose name badge identified her as Zixta, circled around Arya with unsettling speed. You're very soft-looking. She observed. No natural armor, no enhanced musculature, no biological weapons. How did you even pass the entrance requirements? Same tests everyone else took, Arya replied evenly. One of the Krathari, a stocky male named Gurvel, snorted. They must have lowered the standards. There's no way a human could match Krathari's strength scores. I didn't match them, Arya said. I exceeded the requirements in my categories. Which categories? Director asked with barely concealed skepticism. Endurance, adaptive problem-solving, and environmental survival. Arya listed. Director waved a dismissive hand. Endurance means nothing if you can't hit hard enough to matter. And problem-solving is what computers are for. He turned back to the others, right? Let's get our gear assignments. Human, You can follow along. They moved as a group toward the equipment distribution center, and Arya noticed how they unconsciously arranged themselves to keep her at the periphery. She didn't push forward or complain, she simply observed. Her dark eyes, taking in every detail of her squad mates' movements, their body language. The hierarchies already forming between the mat, the equipment center. Each cadet received their standard gear training armor, weapon simulators, communication devices. When Arya's turn came, the Vexian equipment officer looked her up and down with obvious confusion. "We don't have armor in your size," he admitted. "You'll have to use the old cadet gear from storage." He disappeared into a back room and emerged with equipment that had clearly seen better days. The armor was scuffed and dented. The weapon simulator flickered when Arya activated it. "This will have to do until we can fabricate something proper," the officer said. Though his tone suggested this was a low priority, Arya accepted the gear without comment back at the squad bay. Director assigned sleeping quarters. There were 6 bunks, arranged in 2 tiers, Gervel and Krishina. "You take the top bunks on the right," Director announced. "Sixta. Your top left Brontic, bottom right. I'll take bottom left." He paused. Looking at Arya, "I guess you can have the spare bunk in the corner." Spare bunk was separated from the others by an equipment locker. Clearly meant for storage rather than a squad member, it was also closest to the refresher unit, where the ventilation hummed constantly. Arya set her bag on the thin mattress and began organizing her few possessions. She could hear the others talking in low voices, deliberately excluding her from their conversation. "Think she'll wash out in the first week. First day, more likely. I heard humans are weak. Their whole planet is practically a paradise compared to real Death worlds." Arya folded her spare uniform with precise movements. She had grown up on stories of human explorers and soldiers who had proven themselves against impossible odds. She thought of the persistent hunters of ancient Earth who ran their prey to exhaustion across burning savanna. She thought of the mountain climbers who conquered peaks that seemed insurmountable, the deep-sea explorers who descended into crushing darkness, the astronauts who rode pillars of controlled explosions into the void. Or people had always been underestimated. That was fine. Underestimation was an advantage. If you knew how to use ITAS, the station's artificial night cycle began. The lights in the squad bay dimmed. Arya lay on her bunk, listening to the sounds of her squad mates settling in. Tomorrow would bring their first real test. Tomorrow she would begin to show them what humans were capable of. But tonight, she simply waited. Still waters run deep. Her grandmother had always said on. Arya Chen was very, very still. The alarm shrieked through the squad bay at what the station designated as 0600 hours. Arya was already awake. Sitting cross-legged on her bunk in meditation, she had been awake for 30 minutes, using the quiet time to center herself and mentally prepare for the day ahead around her. The other members of Squad Razor groaned and stirred. Director emerged from his bunk with a roar that seemed designed to assert dominance even in the act of waking up. "Move out, squad," he bellowed. "Breakfast in 15. Then we report to the training arena." The others scrambled to their feet with practiced military efficiency. Era rose smoothly, already dressed in her worn training gear. She had learned long ago that preparation prevented panic. The mess hall was a cacophony of noise and motion. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of species crowded around food dispensers, their voices creating a wall of sound that would have been overwhelming to someone unprepared. Arya navigated the chaos with quiet efficiency, selecting nutrient packages designed for Death World. Omnivorist Coalition had at least gotten that much right. Her dietary needs were similar enough to several other species that food wasn't an issue. She found a spot at the edge of Squad Razor's table. The others were engaged in animated conversation about the upcoming assessment, boasting about their training and predicting easy victory. Nobody addressed Arya directly. That was fine. She ate her meal with mechanical precision, fueling her body while her mind ran through potential scenarios. Training arena was the Academy's pride. Massive, holographic environment that could simulate any battlefield condition imaginably, adapted to the skill level of its participants, creating challenges that pushed even the most talented warriors to their limits. First year squads traditionally faced urban warfare scenarios. Testing their ability to work together in complex, unpredictable environments, Instructor Vector was waiting when they arrived. His cybernetic eye gleaming in the harsh overhead lights, "Cadets," he announced, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "Today you will face your first true test as soldiers of the Coalition." He gestured toward the arena's massive doors inside. "You will encounter a simulated combat environment. Your objective is to secure 3 strategic positions while defending against enemy combatants and environmental hazards. You will be evaluated on tactical thinking, combat efficiency, squad cohesion, and adaptability." The first squads entered the arena to scattered applause through the observation windows. Arya watched as they navigated a holographic cityscape that looked like it had been torn apart by war buildings crumbled under simulated artillery fire. Enemy combatants' sophisticated AI constructs moved. With realistic tactical awareness, some squads performed admirably, using their natural advantages to overcome the challenges. A Krathari heavy squad simply smashed through obstacles with brute force. Velik squad danced around enemy fire with blinding speed. Others struggled, their lack of coordination obvious as they took heavy simulated casualties. Squad Razor was called last. Director gathered them in a tight huddle just outside the arena entrance. "Listen up," he said, his voice dropping to a commanding growl. "We're going to show these other squads how it's done, Girval. Krashina, you're our heavy hitters. Take point and smash anything that gets in our way. Brontic, you're our mobile cover. Zixta, scout ahead and identify threats." He paused, glancing briefly at Arya. "Human, you stay in the back. Try not to die or slow us down if things get bad. Find cover and wait for extraction." Arya simply nodded. There was no point in arguing. Actions would speak louder than any words she could offer. The arena doors opened, and they stepped into chaos. The holographic city materialized around them with shocking realism. Arya could feel the heat from burning, smell the acrid smoke, hear the distant sound of weapon fire and screaming. The simulation had been designed to assault every sense, to create stress that would reveal a warrior's true capabilities. Dracot charged forward immediately, leading with the aggressive tactics that Krathari were famous for. Gorvel and Krashina flanked him, their powerful legs eating up ground as they rushed toward the first objective. Exter bounded ahead, her form barely visible as she moved from shadow to shadow. Brantek lumbered behind, his massive frame providing mobile cover, and Arya followed at a distance, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The first objective was a ruined communications tower in the center of a plaza. Combatants held defensive positions around it, their simulated weapons tracking. Squad Razor's approach director didn't hesitate. He led a frontal assault, relying on speed and aggression to overwhelm the defenders. It worked for approximately 30 seconds. Then the simulation adapted. Reinforcements poured from buildings on both sides. Heavy weapons emplacements activated on rooftops within moments. Squad Razor was pinned down, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. "Fall back." Director roared, but there was nowhere to fall back to. The plaza was a killing field, and they were trapped in the center. Gorvel took a simulated hit that would have been fatal, his armor flashing red as the training system registered his death. Krashina fell moments later. Zixta was pinned behind an overturned vehicle, unable to move without exposing herself to withering fire. Brontek's heavy armor was absorbing hits, but even he was slowing down under the concentrated assault. Rector's voice cracked with desperation. "Human," he shouted, his pride finally crumbling in the face of failure. "If you can do anything useful, now would be the time." Arya had been waiting for this moment while the others had focused on the enemy in front of them. She had been reading the entire battlefield. She had mapped the enemy positions, identified their firing patterns, calculated their response algorithms. Now she moved. It started with a sprint that took her away from the plaza, not toward a director. Cursed, probably thinking she was fleeing. But Arya had already dismissed his opinion from her mind. She vaulted through a broken window into a ground-floor shop, her smaller size allowing her to navigate spaces the others couldn't access inside. She grabbed a piece of rubble and hurled it through another window on the opposite side. The crash drew 2 enemy combatants away from their positions. Arya was already moving, flowing through the building like water, finding cracks in stone. She emerged 2 buildings down from where she'd entered. Now behind the enemy's left flank, the combat simulator she carried wasn't as powerful as standard weapons. But she didn't need power. She needed precision. Her first shot took down a heavy weapons operator before he could turn her. Second, disabled a command unit. The enemy formation wavered. Algorithms struggling to respond to a threat from an unexpected vector era didn't give them time to adapt. She sprinted across an alley, using abandoned vehicles for cover. Her endurance bred from millions of years of persistence. Hunting meant she could maintain this pace far longer than the simulation expected. She reached a half-collapsed building and began climbing. The structure was unstable. But Arya had grown up free climbing the red rocks of Utah. She knew how to read stone and metal, how to distribute her weight, how to move with controlled urgency. She reached the third floor and moved to a window overlooking the plaza. From this angle, she could see everything. She could see the enemy positions, Squad Razor's desperate defensive posture, and most importantly, she could see the structural weaknesses in the surrounding buildings. Area aimed her simulator at a damaged support column across the plaza. One shot the column buckled. The building it supported groaned. Then it collapsed. Tons of simulated rubble crashed down onto half the enemy position, eliminating a dozen combatants in seconds. The enemy algorithms panicked, not programmed to handle environmental manipulation at this level. They broke formation. Trying to reorganize, Arya was already moving again. Descending the building and circling to the right flank, she moved through shadows and smoke. Practically invisible in her worn gray armor, she set up ambushes at choke points, used debris to create barriers that funneled enemies into kill zones, and employed hit-and-run tactics that kept the AI off balancing. Minutes after Director S's desperate plea, the plaza was clear. Squad Razor stood in shocked silence as Arya emerged from the smoke. Her breathing elevated but controlled, her armor barely marked. Objectives 2 and 3 are this way, she said quietly, pointing toward the remaining targets. If we move now, we can use the confusion. Director stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he nodded. You heard her. He managed to move out this time. When Arya moved, they followed her lead. Arya led Squad Razor through the burning streets with a confidence that seemed to radiate from her small frame. The dynamics had shifted completely in those 10 minutes of chaos where, before Drekta had commanded, and the others had followed without question. Now every eye was on the human. She moved through the urban warfare simulation like she had been born to wither. Paths seemed random at first, ducking through buildings, circling around obvious routes, sometimes backtracking entirely, but there was method in what appeared to be madness. Why aren't we taking the direct route? Director asked, his pride struggling against his newfound respect. The second objective is 3 blocks north, because the simulation is learning, Arya replied. Not breaking stride, it saw how we approached the first objective if we use predictable paths. It will have ambushes waiting. She pointed to a narrow alley between 2 collapsed structures. Through here we can't fit through there, Brontic rumbled. His massive Vexian frame, obviously too large for the Gaparia, was already moving. Then we make it fit. She examined the rubble blocking the alley, her eyes tracking the way the debris had fallen, identifying which pieces were load-bearing and which were simply resting on top. She placed small charges from her equipment pack standard issue for all cadets at 3 specific points back. She said simply. The explosion was controlled and precise. The rubble shifted, widening the gap just enough for even Brontic to squeeze through. How did you know that would work? Zixta asked, her large eyes studying Arya with new intensity. Physics. Arya said, same on every world. They emerged from the alley into a marketplace that had been transformed into a war zone. Stalls had been overturned, creating makeshift barricades in Omi. Combatants held elevated positions in the surrounding buildings, but Arya had studied the layout from her vantage point at the first objective. She knew exactly where the enemy would be. Zixta, you see that fountain? Arya pointed to a decorative structure in the center of the marketplace. Can you reach it without being seen? The Velix studied the route, her body already tensing for the sprint. Yes. Confirm. Good. When you get there, fire 3 shots at the building on the east side. Then retreat back the way you came. That will draw them out? No, Arya said. That will make them think we're coming from the east, which means they'll reposition. She turned to Brontic when they move. You're going to walk straight down the main avenue. The Dexian's eyes widened. That's suicide, no. Arya corrected, that's a distraction. Your armor can take the hits long enough for what we need. She was already positioning Director. Gurvel and Krishina at different points around the marketplace, perimeter each. Krathri would hit a different section of the enemy formation simultaneously while they were focused on the decoy threats. This is insane. Director muttered, but he was moving to his position even as he spoke. This is tactics. Arya replied, the plan executed with beautiful precision's Lexta shots echoed through the marketplace. And just as Arya had predicted, the enemy combatants shifted their positions to counter the perceived threat. Brentek emerged onto the main avenue. His heavy footfalls, announcing his presence, every enemy weapon turned toward Heyman in that moment of distraction. The three Krathari struck from completely different angles. The enemy formation collapsed into chaos. Combatants were caught in crossfire from their own algorithms. Unable to track threats coming from four directions simultaneously, Arya moved through the confusion like a ghost. She wasn't trying to rack up eliminations. She was securing the objective while the enemy focused on the larger, more obvious threats. She slipped into the building that housed the second strategic position. A lone enemy guard stood with Charya's training simulator, dropped him before he could raise an alarm. She secured the position and transmitted the success code objective to complete. She announced over the squad channel outside. The sounds of simulated combat were already fading the enemy combatants. Their formation broken and their strategic position compromised. We're retreating to regroup. Squad Razor gathered at the secured position, and for the first time, Arya saw something like respect in their eyes. That was Krishna started, then stopped, apparently unable to find words efficient. Zixta Finished Rector approached Arya directly. Where did you learn to fight like this? He demanded Earth, Arya said simply, but you're not a frontline fighter. Director pressed, you don't rely on strength or speed, no? Arya agreed, humans aren't the strongest or the fastest. We're the most adaptable. She pulled up a tactical map on her datapad, already planning their approach to the third objective every species here has. Natural advantages, Krathri? Our powerful Velix are quick. Thexian are durable, but humans survived on a world that was trying to kill us every single day. We didn't survive because we could overpower our predators or outrun them. We survived because we could think our way around problems and outlast anything that came after us. Gurvel leaned in. Studying the map, so what you're saying is that humans are persistence predators? Arya interrupted. On Earth, my ancestors would chase prey animals for hours or even days. The prey would be faster in a sprint. But humans never stopped coming. We ran them until they collapsed from exhaustion. Then we used tools and tactics to bring them down. She looked up at the squad. The coalition species have bred for direct combat for thousands of years. That's made you powerful. But it's also made you predictable. You think in terms of immediate force application. Humans think in terms of whatever works. The third objective loomed ahead. A fortified command center that every other squad had struggled to breach. Arya studied it from a distance, her mind already running through dozens of scenarios. We can't take that head on, Director observed. Even with your tactics, no. Arya agreed, so we don't take it head on over the next 20 minutes. Arya dismantled the command center's defenses with surgical precision. She didn't attack. She created problems. She triggered environmental hazards that forced defenders to abandon their position. She used the simulation's own adaptive algorithms against it, feeding it information that made it commit resources to defending against threats that didn't exist. She turned the fortified command center into a trap for its own occupants. When Squad Razor finally entered the building, they met minimal resistance. The defenders had been pulled out of position, scattered across multiple contingencies. Their formation broken before the first shot was even fired. Arya secured the final objective and transmitted the completion code. The simulation froze. The holographic environment flickered and then faded, revealing the stark walls of the training arena. Instructor Victor's voice boomed through the speaker's. Squad Razor, exit the arena for debriefing. They emerged into the observation area where the other squads had been. Watching, the silence was absolute. Every cadet stared at them, specifically at Arya, with expressions Ranging from shock to disbelief, the massive displays on the walls showed Squad Razor's performance metrics completion. Time was nearly 40% faster than any other first-year squad in the Academy's recorded history. Enemy combatants eliminated was off the charts. Environmental tactics employed was a category that had apparently never registered numbers this high before. Most tellingly, casualties sustained was at exactly 2-2. Crathery, who had fallen in the initial disastrous assault before Arya had taken operational control, Victar, stood at the front of the room, his cybernetic eye fixed on Arya when he spoke. His voice carried a weight it hadn't held before. Cadet Chen, he said. Approach. Arya walked forward, aware of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. She stopped in front of the instructor and came to attention. Sir, in 300 years of Academy history, Vector began, I have never seen a first-year cadet perform at the level you just demonstrated. He paused, and Arya thought she detected something almost like concern in his expression. The question I must ask is this: was that performance representative of human combat capability? Or are you an exceptional outlier among your species? Arya considered the question carefully. Sir, I am a trained soldier, but I am not exceptional by human standards. What I demonstrated today is standard human tactical thinking combined with baseline human endurance. She gestured toward the display, showing her performance metrics. Every human on Earth could perform similarly. Given proper training, the observation room erupted in whispers. Vector raised a hand for silence. Then Earth's classification as a death world was not a clerical error. No, sir. Arya confirmed it was accurate. She saw understanding dawn in the eyes around her, understanding and something that might have been fear. The debriefing session stretched for nearly 2 hours as Instructor Vector dissected Squad Razor's performance with clinical precision. He replayed segments of their arena run, highlighting the tactical decisions that had led to their unprecedented success. What became increasingly clear as the analysis continued was that almost every one of those decisions had come from Area Director Sadin. Uncomfortable silence as Vector pointed out how the initial frontal assault had been tactically unsound. The Crathery's scales flushed darker with embarrassment, but to his credit, he absorbed the criticism without complaint. The human cadet demonstrated several principles that I want all squads to observe, Vector announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the observation room. First, environmental awareness. She used the terrain not as an obstacle but as a weapon. Second, adaptive thinking. When direct assault failed, she immediately shifted to unconventional tactics. Third, resource management. She conserved her energy and ammunition, striking only when maximum effect could be achieved. He paused, his cybernetic eyes sweeping across the assembled cadets. But most importantly, she demonstrated something that many of you seem to have forgotten. The goal of combat is not to fight. The goal is to win. How you achieve that victory is irrelevant. The other squads shifted uncomfortably. Many of them came from warrior cultures where combat was ritualized, where there were rules about honorable engagement and fair fights. Arya had shown them what happened when someone treated war as a problem to be solved, rather than a contest to be won. Dismissed. Vector finally announced, reflect on what you have observed. Tomorrow's training will build on these lessons. The cadets filed out in unusual silence. Normally after training sessions, the halls rang with boisterous conversation as warriors recounted their exploits today. There was only quiet murmuring and frequent glances in Arya's direction back in the squad bay. The atmosphere was completely different from the previous night. Squad Razor gathered around the central table, and for the first time, there was a space waiting for Arianaut at the edge. But in the middle of the group that was incredible, Zixta said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. The way you read the battlefield, anticipated enemy movements, used the environment. I've never seen anything like it. Neither have I, admitted Director. Looked directly at Arya, and she could see the struggle in his eyes as pride warred with newfound respect. I owe you an apology. I treated you like you were a burden. I was wrong. You weren't wrong to doubt me, Arya replied calmly. You had no evidence of my capabilities. Doubt is reasonable. But now you have evidence. Now we can work together as a real squad. Gervil leaned forward, His massive hands clasped on the table. "I want to understand how you think," he said. "When we were pinned down in that plaza, what were you seeing that we weren't?" Arya pulled up her datapad and displayed a tactical map. "You were seeing enemy positions and trying to figure out how to fight through them." She explained, "I was seeing a system. The enemy combatants were AI, which means they follow algorithms. Algorithms are predictable if you understand the variables they're working with." She highlighted different sections of the map. They had positioned for maximum coverage of the plaza, which meant they were expecting a frontal assault or a tactical retreat. They weren't prepared for someone to leave the engagement area entirely and attack from an unexpected vector. "So you exploited the gap in their programming." Krishina observed exactly human warfare evolved in an environment where we were rarely the strongest or fastest. "We had to be smarter, we had to think 3 moves ahead," Brontix's deep voice rumbled on my world. "We have a saying, the strongest tree survives the storm on Earth. We have a different saying." Arya replied, "The tree that bends survives the storm. The one that stands rigid breaks the conversation," continued late into the night Cycle Squad. Razor peppered Arya with questions about human tactics, Earth's military history, and the training methods that had prepared her for this moment. She answered patiently, sharing stories of human conflicts that seemed to horrify and fascinate her squadmates in equal measure weight. Zixta interrupted during one explanation. "You're telling me that humans fought wars that lasted years? Sometimes decades. Some conflicts on Earth have lasted generations." The Velix's eyes widened. "How do you maintain troop morale over that length of time?" "We don't think of it as maintaining morale," Arya said. "We think of it as dedication to a cause. Humans can be incredibly stubborn when we believe in something across the academy." Similar conversations were happening in other squad bays. The word was spreading fast. The quiet human girl wasn't weak. She was dangerous in ways that traditional warrior cultures hadn't anticipated in one bay. A group of Velix cadets had pulled up Earth's file on their communal datapad. "Listen to this," one of them said. Reading aloud, "Earth classification, Death World. Category 7 inches, extreme environmental variability including violent weather patterns, tectonic instability, an aggressive microbial life, native species developed advanced persistence hunting capabilities, complex tool use, and sophisticated pack coordination warning. Human combat doctrine emphasizes adaptability, asymmetric warfare, and total resource commitment." Another Velix leaned in to read over their shoulder. "There's a whole section on human endurance capabilities." "Ah," they said. Sounding disturbed, "It says humans can run for hours without stopping, that they can survive injuries that would kill most species, that they have a documented tendency to enter altered mental states under extreme stress that temporarily suppress pain and fear responses." Berserker states, "The first Velix confirmed that's what the file calls them in another bay." A group of Krathri were having a more philosophical discussion. "I thought strength was the ultimate military virtue." Owen admitted the human proved that wrong today. "She wasn't weak." Another argued she was strong in a different way. Mental strength, tactical strength, but she couldn't match any of us in raw physical power. And yet, she defeated an enemy force that had pinned down 3 of our warriors. The first pointed out, "What does that tell you about the nature of strength?" The conversation fell into thoughtful silence back in Squad Razor's Bay. Director had gone quiet, staring at nothing while the others continued their animated discussion. Finally, he spoke. "I need to ask you something," he said to Arya, "and I want an honest answer." The others fell silent. Sensing the weight in his voice today in the arena, Director continued. "You held back at first. You watched us fail before you acted. Why?" Arya met his gaze steadily. "Because you needed to fail." She said simply, "If I had jumped in immediately, you would have resented me, would have thought I was showing off, or that I didn't trust your leadership. But when you were truly desperate, when you asked for my help, you were ready to listen, so you manipulated us," Gorval said. Though there was more curiosity than accusation in his tone, "I gave you the opportunity to learn." Arya corrected, "There's a difference. A good leader knows when to lead and when to follow today. You needed me to follow until you were ready for me to lead." Director absorbed this for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "Palm up," in the Krathri gesture of respect between warriors tomorrow. We train together as equals. He said, you lead when your skills are needed, I lead when mine are needed. We all contribute according to our strengths. Arya placed her smaller hand on his palm, agreed as the squad finally settled in for the night. Arya returned to her corner bunk, but this time Zixta approached with an extra blanket. The ventilation is loud over here. Velik said this might help. Thank you, Arya replied. Genuinely touched by the gesture, she lay down and closed her eyes. But sleep was slow to come. She could feel the shift that had happened today. The Academy had seen her as a curiosity, a token admission from a newly contacted species. Now, they saw her as a threat. Or perhaps as an Acetamara would bring new challenges, the other squads would be studying her tactics. Learning from her methods, the instructors would be reassessing their training programs in light of human capabilities. The entire dynamic of the Academy had shifted, and Arya Chen, the quiet girl from Earth, had been the one to shift it. She smiled in the darkness. This was exactly what she had come here to do, not to prove that she could survive among the galaxy's warriors, but to prove that humanity belonged to her, to show them that Earth's children were ready to take their place among the stars, and if that meant shattering a few assumptions along the way, so be it. Still waters run deep, and the galaxy was about to learn just how deep humanity's waters truly ran. The days following the arena assessment transformed the Academy in ways both subtle and profound. Arya noticed the changes immediately when she entered the mess hall the next morning. Instead of the usual dismissive glances, cadets watched her with open curiosity. A few even nodded in acknowledgement as she passed the Velik's cadet who had mocked her size on orientation. Day now stepped aside to give her clear access to the food dispensers at the squad razor table. The dynamic was completely different. Director actually asked for her input on the day's training schedule. A Gorval saved her a seat in the middle of the group, rather than at the end of Inbrontic, who had barely acknowledged her existence before. Engaged her in conversation about Earth's gravity compared to his homeworld. I've been thinking about what you said. The massive Vexian rumbled about bending instead of standing rigid on my world. I take pride in our unmovable nature, but yesterday I was just a target, a very large, very slow target. You weren't slow when it mattered. Arya pointed out your charge down that avenue drew every enemy weapon that took courage, that took stupidity. Brontic corrected with what might have been a chuckle, but I understand now why you asked me to do it. Sometimes being the obvious target is the most valuable role. Exactly. Arya confirmed every squad member has strengths. The key is using them in ways that complement each other. The morning's training session was in the combat simulator's individual pods that created virtual opponents for hand-to-hand practice. Area entered her assigned pod and faced the holographic opponent. Tit was scaled to her size, which immediately told her something. The Academy had updated its training protocols previously. All combat simulators had been calibrated for larger species. Now they were adapting to human proportions. The match began, and Arya moved through the techniques she had learned on Earth Judo, throws that used an opponent's momentum against them, strikes to vulnerable points rather than attempting to overpower through brute force eves. Footwork that kept her out of grappling range. The simulator adapted, learning her patterns, but Arya adapted faster when she finally scored the winning touch. She exited the pod to find a small crowd of cadets watching through the observation window. They scattered when she emerged, but not before she saw the datapads. In their hands, they had been recording her sessions, studying her techniques. By midday, the phenomenon had spread throughout the Academy. Cadets, who had never spoken to Arya, now approached with questions. Is it true that humans evolved to run down prey animals over distances? Can you really survive on almost any organic matter? I heard about humans being able to heal from injuries that would be permanently crippling to other species. Arya answered each question patiently, neither exaggerating human capabilities nor downplaying them. She spoke of Earth's harsh environment, of the evolutionary pressures that had shaped her species, of the diversity of human cultures and their different approaches to warfare. Some cadets listened with fascination, others with something approaching fear. During the afternoon tactical session, Instructor Victor made an unexpected announcement today. We will be analyzing historical battles from various coalition species. He began, each squad will present a battle from their homeworld's military history, however. I am adding a requirement. You must also present how the battle might have proceeded differently. If human tactical doctrine had been applied. The room stirred with interest. Vector. A cybernetic eye found Arya Cadet Chen. You will serve as a consultant to all squads. Help them understand how your species approaches warfare for the next several hours. Arya moved from squad to squad, examining their historical battles. Ecrotheory squad presented a glorious frontal assault that had broken an enemy line through sheer force area, suggested how flanking maneuvers and feigned retreats might have achieved the same result with fewer casualties. Velek squad showcased a lightning raid that had crippled an enemy. Command structure area demonstrated how sustained psychological warfare could have prevented the need for the raid entirely by breaking enemy morale before battle was joined. Dexian squad described a defensive siege where their ancestors had held a position for months through sheer endurance. Araya introduced the concept of active defense raiding enemy supply lines, disrupting their operations, turning a static siege into a war of attrition that favored the defenders with each presentation. The cadets began to understand something fundamental about human warfare. Humans didn't have a single combat doctrine. They had all of them. They could fight like Krathery when strength was needed, like Velix when speed was required, like Vexian when endurance was called for, but they could also fight in ways that none of those species had considered, combining tactics in unexpected ways, adapting to circumstances with frightening speed. As the session ended, a young Krathery cadet approached Arya hesitantly. "May I ask you something personal?" she said. "Of course." "Why did you come to the academy?" the cadet asked. "Your people are new to the coalition? You could have stayed on Earth, risen through your own military ranks, become a leader there. Why come here, where you knew you would face prejudice?" Arya considered the question carefully because Earth joining the coalition isn't just about trade agreements or technology exchange. She finally said it's about proving we can stand alongside the galaxy's established powers. Someone had to be first. Someone had to show that humans could compete at the highest levels. "I volunteered to be that someone." The Krathery cadet nodded slowly. "You knew you would be tested." "I knew I would be underestimated." Arya corrected. "That's different. Being underestimated is an advantage if you use it correctly." That evening, Squad Razor gathered in their bay for what had become an informal tradition. Tactical Discussion Director had downloaded files on human military history and was reading through them with obvious fascination. "This is disturbing," he announced, looking up from his datapad. "What is?" Zixta asked. "All of it," Director replied. "I'm reading about something called the Battle of Stalingrad. Humans fought in a single city for months. The casualties on both sides were in the hundreds of thousands, and they just kept fighting. That was a particularly brutal conflict." Arya acknowledged, "But yes, humans can be extraordinarily stubborn when defending something we believe in." Stubborn, Scorval repeated. "That's one word for it. Terrifying is another." "I also found references to something called guerrilla warfare," Krashina added, "where smaller forces harass larger armies indefinitely, never allowing them to bring their full strength to bear." "Humans invented that, refined it at least," Arya said. "When you can't win through direct confrontation, you change the nature of the confrontation. You make the enemy fight on your terms instead of theirs." Zixta was studying a different file. "It says here that humans have a psychological trait called pack bonding." She read, "Where you form intense emotional connections, not just with your own species, but with almost anything. You bond with animals, with plants, with inanimate objects. You even bond with abstract concepts. Is that true?" Arya smiled. "Very true. Humans form attachments easily. It's part of what makes us effective in squad-based combat. We fight harder for people we care about. But it also means we can find common ground with almost any species. We're good at understanding different perspectives because we're used to working with diverse groups." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the bay door. Director opened it to find Instructor Vector standing in the corridor. "Cadet Chen." The instructor said a word. "Please." Arya followed him into the hallway, wondering what warranted a personal visit from an instructor. Vector led her to a quieter section of the corridor. "Before speaking, I wanted to inform you that your arena Performance has attracted attention at the highest levels of the Academy. He said the Commandant has requested a full analysis. There is discussion about modifying the entire training curriculum based on human tactical principles, I see. Arya replied neutrally, "You should also know that your performance has created some concern among certain factions." Vector continued, "Species who have built their entire military culture around specific combat philosophies are now questioning whether those philosophies are adequate. This is causing political ripples beyond just the Academy."
Asked he fixed her with.
His cybernetic IU came here to prove that humans belong in the coalition military. You have succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, but success on this scale comes with responsibility. You are no longer just a cadet, you are a symbol everything. You will be scrutinized as representative of human capabilities. Can you handle that pressure? Arya met his gaze without flinching. Instructor, I grew up on a world that was actively trying to kill me every day I survived, not because I was special, but because every human learns to handle pressure from birth. I can handle this. Vector nodded slowly. I believe you can. Which is why I'm going to make your life more difficult. He pulled up a file on his datapad. Starting tomorrow, you will be assigned as a tactical advisor to multiple squads, not just Squad Razor. You will help train other cadets in human combat doctrine. You will also be taking advanced tactical courses normally reserved for third-year cadets. The Academy doesn't want to waste your potential on standard first-year curriculum, I understand. Arya said one more thing. Victor added the other instructors, and I have been reviewing Earth's military history.